Here's an interview from one of our past shows on Rock and Metal Revival. If you're interested in hearing full shows, go to our Facebook page and check out our list of affiliates for times and places where you can hear Rock and Metal Revival. There is a title track to one of my all-time favorite albums, Allied Forces, and it's been no secret since the beginning of this show, Jerry, that we're big Triumph fans.
Oh, yeah.
And this last week, we had the pleasure of watching the Triumph Rock and Roll Machine documentary. And with us today, it is an honor to have Rick Emmett of Triumph with us on the show. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Gentlemen, it is my pleasure.
It is a great honor to have. First, I want to say that this documentary on the band is outstanding. The response has been great. Rick, are you surprised at how many people are still listening to and loving the band Triumph?
I'm not, because I'd spent the years where I was sort of out in the wilderness and, had left the band, and then there had been bad blood, and, there was a couple of decades of that. I mean, I kept going out and playing shows, and even when I would do small things like acoustic duo things, there would still be a very strong response. And people, I mean, you can never get around the fact that one of the large appeals of music is the nostalgia thing, and people wanted to hear those old songs from the Triumph catalog. So I wasn't that surprised. I mean, obviously, and as you can see in the documentary, we're going in Walk of Fame and Hall of Fame, and all of these kinds of things were happening, and so that was a little surprising that on a sort of a commercial industrial level there was still this kind of interest. But I was always aware of the fact that the band had made a connection to fans, to people in the seats, and that was something that it didn't have anything to do with the size of business or the style of how the business went, what bands were getting played on MTV or on radio or whatever. We had that connection, and that's a pretty hard thing to sever. That's like family,
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I love the documentary, and dude, I gotta say thank you personally, because being a guitar player, I've spent so many hours trying to learn how to play your stuff, and being able to talk to you just blows my mind.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I mean, I think about, all the hours that I spent learning, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Richie Blackmore, Steve Howe,
Yeah.
And I haven't get to meet all these guys, but I did get to meet Steve Howe once and get to have dinner with him.
Oh.
And I know the feeling. Like, I have many of my own guitar heroes and things, and had the great fortune of getting to meet Chet Atkins, 1979, and
nice.
Some of those, got to play with Steve Morse and
I saw a little clip
George
of that.
Benson. Like, holy cow,
Whoa.
so.
Cool. Yeah, now, I think you're the guy I should blame for my addiction to double neck guitars, So, I want to know, what was your first double neck guitar? Because those were pretty rare back then.
They were. The first one I got was an Ibanez, and it was a kind of a Gibson knockoff, but it was a bolt-on neck version.
Okay.
And it was a pretty good guitar. It stayed in tune. It was pretty high quality, but because it had sort of bolt-on necks, then I was always kind of hungering for something else. And I got a Gibson when I first joined Triumph, and I was getting new gear. I got an old Gibson, a white one. And so but it wasn't actually as good sounding and as good playing as the Ibanez had been. And the thing about that early Gibson, and it was even stamped on the back of the headstocks with 2s, so it was a factory second.
Oh, okay.
And I'm guessing it was maybe the finish or something, I don't know. But the guitar was weird because you're a double neck guy, so you'll know this. If you leaned back and the headstock and the necks went backwards, then the guitar went sharp. But if you leaned forward and the necks went forward, it would go flat. So, that guitar didn't last too long. I think around 82, 83, I got an Ibanez Artist double neck.
Yeah,
and it weighed as much as a Cadillac. It was ridiculous, but it stayed in tune. It was a great guitar. And then I made my Yamaha deal in '85, and I had a Yamaha. So
nice.
Hey, Rick, I know one of the parts that hit me hard in the documentary was how many fans were so touched and influenced by your music. And I know when I was young, I was going through a lot of stuff with my mom passing and some other stuff, and Allied Forces and Fight the Good Fight got me through a lot of tough times and still do today at times. How does that make you feel to know your music has touched people so deeply and affected their lives?
I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and it's a great honor, but at the same time, it's very humbling to know that, you know, some of the things that you set out to do in life, you actually accomplished them. They actually happened. And so when you get the evidence of that in front of you, then there's just something, I mean, it's this, it's like a coin. It has two sides. One side of it is gratification, and the other side of it is just humility. That you're just humbled by this, you know. So, you know, I'll tell you a funny story. I have my own website, and I have a forum on there, and I respond to email. So somebody new, a guy named Serge, showed up on the forum the other day, and maybe 2 days ago, yesterday, and he was asking, he's doing a recording in his little home studio, and he wanted to know, he's doing Fight the Good Fight, and he's going, how did you get those guitar sounds? Like, especially that sound in the verse. Like, how did you get that? And it had been a long time since I'd sat down and listened to the tune myself, so I put the CD in the thing, and I sat down and I listened to the tune. I'm going, you know, this is pretty good. Like, we kind of got a lot of things right in 1980, 81, when we were working on that record and doing things. And I had bought, I'd gone to a guitar shop and I'd bought a Fender Telecaster and a Gibson Howard Roberts. And I used those two guitars a fair bit on that album. But the guitar sound in Fight the Good Fight in the verses, it's just a Fender Telecaster on its bridge pickup through a little tiny Roland Orange Cube, I don't know, 40-watt amp or something, clean, solid state. So it's this spanking clean guitar. And when I was listening, I was realizing we did that stereo. Like, I put one track of it way over on the right side of the stereo and the other way over on the left. And there's no other guitar in the verse at all. That's the only guitar that plays.
Wow.
And I'm listening to it and I'm going, man, that sounds great. You know, it's been such a long time since I sat down and listened to it. So it's the same dynamic that works for fans works for me too sometimes. I get to listen to something and go, oh, geez, I forgot how good that was. That's great.
Dude, I tell you. Yeah, now, like the US Festival, when we watched, I remember going to Janesville to watch that because we didn't have MTV in our town here. And I remember seeing Triumph on there. I'd seen you live a couple times already in the Allied Forces tour. And man, what is that, the Sunburst guitar? Is that a Framus, I think it's called?
Yeah, it's a Framus Ackerman guitar. Like, there was a guitar player in a band called Focus, Jan Ackerman, and they were from Holland, and I loved that band. And I thought that guy was just one of the coolest guitar players. And of course, the big song they had here in America, or North America, was Hocus Pocus. And I used to play that on stage when I was in the band before I was in Triumph. Anyways, in 1974. I started to see ads for this guitar in Guitar Player, and it was kind of like a Les Paul that had a thyroid problem. Like, it started kind of swollen up a little bit, but it was simplified electronics. It only had a master volume and tone, nice cutaway 24 frets, and it had these really intriguing inlays on the fingerboard.
Yeah, just beautiful guitar.
Yeah, it was a really great guitar, and I'd never even you couldn't go down to the local guitar shop and try one out. But I ordered it. There was a guy in Nashville that was like the Framus distributor, and I'd written him, and he wrote me back and said, I got one, but Chet Atkins we lent it to him hoping he might be interested in it, but I could get it back from him and I could sell it to you if you want. And I went, well, if it's good enough for Chet Atkins to want to check out, then it's good enough for me to risk. And I can't remember how much I paid for it. But anyways, that guitar sort of became my signature guitar from about 1976 through to about, I would say, 84.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it looks like it's doesn't have, it's semi-hollow. Because I've seen ones where it has a bridge, and I've seen ones where with a tailpiece and a bridge right there, and I've seen those ones where the tailpiece comes off the end.
Yeah, I experimented with that guitar so much. I changed the pickups in it. I must have changed the bridge on it 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
Because it came with just a one-piece kind of, like the old style, like a Les Paul TV special. Yeah, that was what it came with. So you couldn't intonate each string. And I went, no, I got to get somewhere. So the first change I did was I went to a badass that had its own kind of little stop tailpiece thingy on the back side of it. Then I went to like a harp style tailpiece, like a standard, like some Gibson 335s have. Okay. And then I went back to a badass that had a fine tuner on the back of it, and I would shred my hand up on the exposed string ends. That was no good.
Ooh.
So,
yeah, definitely no good.
Yeah, then I finally put a Kaler on it, like I literally, and that was a mistake. I felt so bad that I'd cut the hole in the top to put the Kaler in. And then eventually I took it to a luthier. I had him put the piece of the top back in and have a tune-o-matic with a stop tailpiece. Now, the reason I couldn't do a stop tailpiece, the guitar was an unusual one. It was like a 335. It had a center block that ran down the middle. So it was hollow. It was chambered on both sides, but it had the center block. But the center block thinned down right where the bridge was, and it only ran to the back end, and it was only about, 2.5, 3 inches wide. It wasn't wide enough to be able to take the bolts for a stud tailpiece. So for years I didn't do it. And then finally, after I'd left Triumph, I guess it was about 89 or something, I had a luthier literally go in through the back, place blocks so that you could put stud tailpieces, and then I put a stud tailpiece on it. And then that guitar, I sold it to somebody so that I could fund one of my kids' college educations.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
Nice. Hey, Rick, you released an outstanding book of poetry called Reinvention Poems. With songs being a lot like poetry, what is more difficult and which is more enjoyable?
I enjoy creative process no matter what it is. So, I love writing songs. I love writing guitar pieces, instrumental things. I love writing poetry. I wrote a column in Guitar Player magazine for, 12, 13 years, and I loved doing that. I just love being creative. So if you're asking me to sort of, differentiate between the process of writing a poem and writing a song, I would say that songwriting exists on a few different kinds of levels. You're looking for the prosody between melody and harmony and phrasing and lyric and all of that stuff. When you're writing poetry, you don't have to, there's not as many rules. Poetry has its own, but you don't necessarily, and I've never felt like I had to observe them, and maybe that's partly because I didn't study to be a poet, and it wasn't what I'd initially had an ambition to be. I was a musician and I became a writer of songs, and as I came at poetry, I came at it from that point of view where it was like, poetry could be fun because there aren't as many things you have to sort of be worried about. You can just kind of let your creativity and your imagination run, and then you have to try and distill that down so that it just works with the least amount of words as possible. So poetry is almost like distilling acres and acres of grain in order to make whiskey. Like it's a distillation process. Whereas when you're writing songs and you're making music, there's a complexity to that because of the levels of it. You come up with an idea, you start to, it's got to have a certain kind of phrasing. You want the melodies to work a certain way. You want the harmonic structure to work a certain kind of way. And by the time you've sort of gone through all that, in the end, you're also going to present it in a kind of a style, like you're going to record it and say, well, this is going to be heavy metal, or this is going to be, pop, or this is going to be kind of folky, or this tune seems like it's going to be jazzy. Poetry doesn't necessarily take on that kind of I don't know how you want to describe it, a costume or an appearance. It's not styled up in such a significant manner. It has its own style, but it's almost inherent in the way you've structured the phrasing and the words. So I don't know. I like being able to do both. It's a lovely thing to be able to expand my creative, here in my 68th year of life, to be expanding my creative palette.
Man, I tell you, I checked out your website. I love the Eleanor Rigby cover you guys did. What is the Canadian Cover Crew? Where can I hear more of this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those kinds of things where there's a guy out of I think he lives in Guelph. His last name is Carroll, and he's kind of the guy that functions as a producer, and he just loves old songs from the 60s, and he wants to produce them. So I have a friend named Mike Schotten, and he's got a studio here in Burlington where I live, and every now and then I get a call, and it's like, hey, do you want to come and play guitar on one of these old, like I played my sitar guitar on a couple of old Motown things, and they did a remake of "Come and Get Your Love." You remember that tune?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Come and get your love. So I got to play all the little sitar guitar parts.
Oh, that is
a
cool sound. That is a cool sound. I remember that.
Yeah. And so then the Eleanor Rigby thing was just, they gave me a call one day and said, hey, John Carroll and his wife, they want to sing backgrounds, but they're hoping you'll do a lead vocal. And I went, yeah, sure. And it was a real string quartet. And my friend Claudio Vena was sort of the viola player on it, but I know Claudio, he's played on some of my records, and I did a gig once with an orchestra, and he was the conductor. So I went, yeah, that'll be fun. I'm in. It'll be good quality, and it was so much fun. And so I think to answer your question, I think it's just a question of whenever John Carroll decides he wants to do another song.
Nice. Cool.
Hey, Rick, I was fortunate enough. I searched everywhere, high and low, here in the States, but I did get a copy of the Triumph box set.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
he looked everywhere.
I went everywhere, and the whole package is like the ultimate package for a Triumph fan. It's great looking back at some of the history of the band. Did you really, were you real involved with that? And what was it like to look back through some of that history?
I wasn't really involved in it, and I can tell you who was. Obviously Mike and Gil were, but there's a guy named Andy Curran, and Andy had worked as sort of like the A&R man at Anthem Records for the Rush guys for years. And he had overseen the making of many of the Rush box sets, so he kind of knew the drill. Like, he really knew this is what people want, this is what's really good. So he consulted with the Triumph guys, and then at a certain point they called me and said, hey, Rick, this box set's happening. Is there anything, you think about it? I go, well, if you want, I could, a couple of my rock tunes, that might be a good thing to put in there for fans. He went, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's do that. So, and then he said, would you handwrite some lyrics? I went, yeah, okay, I can do that. So that was the extent of my involvement. But, if you want to thank somebody, Andy Curran is the guy you should be thanking.
Nice.
Cool. Now, in the documentary, we met a lot of super fans. You've met somebody like from a totally different genre who's just like totally Rik-Emmett fan or what, or Triumph fan, or...
Do you mean like just fans, or do you mean like musicians? From
just,
from showbiz or something?
Yeah, like that. Either or.
Oh, geez,
Yeah, we've gone forever.
Over the course of we're talking 45, 46 years.
Oh yeah.
There's, I mentioned earlier that I once got to jam with George Benson. Now, George Benson is not a Triumph fan, but in a way he was kind of a Rik-Emmett fan, and I think it was because I'd written in guitar magazines and just, doing interviews in guitar magazines and things like that George sort of became aware of who I was, that I would be in some guitar poll contests and things. And so then, one thing led to another, and we were playing a guitar festival in Buffalo, New York, and he came to the gig and got up on stage and played with me.
No way.
It was one of the most amazing nights of my life that, I'm getting to play on stage with George Benson. And, of course, the audience at my show, they were going insane because it was sort of just as you were describing or driving at there. It was so unexpected.
Yeah.
Like, why would George Benson be at a Rick Emmett gig and getting up on stage and playing with Rick? So that was a real, amazing thing. That was around 2003, I think. But, I mean, later in life, I've had the great fortune of doing things like singing the anthem at sports events.
Oh, nice.
So the Blue Jays manager for a long time was a guy named John Gibbons, and Gibby, he was a Triumph fan from when he was a teenager in Texas growing up. He was an Air Force brat, and he'd grown up on a base outside of San Antonio, and so he was a San Antonio, like he would have come to Triumph gigs way back in the day. So I would go down and get to my son, who was a baseball player in college and stuff. He actually got to go down and do a workout with the Jays on the field because Gibby was such a fan that he had his third base coach was Brian Butterfield, and he said, "Yeah, you got to do a workout with his kid, Butter." Like he was telling him just because he was a big fan of the band. So I've had many lovely things like that happen in my life where. Unexpected people from different walks of life end up being Triumph fans, and that's the thing about music. It crosses over the walls and borders and boundaries, and it has an ability to make the strangest of bedfellows. That's one of the things about music that I just love so much.
Hey, Rick, now my first Triumph show was at the World Series of Rock at County Stadium here in Milwaukee.
Oh, yeah.
And that show was one that changed me as a music fan. Over the years, you guys have played some huge, the US Festival, Sweden Rock Festival, Rocklahoma. Is there one show in your time in Triumph that stands out more than the rest?
Well, no. It's hard to say one, because I could reach back and I could pick anyone and tell you a story, I can remember a gig from Brantford, Ontario, where Gil fell off the stage at the back at the end of the show. And we found him lying in the curtains, and he'd scraped his side, and he probably had a few too many drinks that night. And he was okay. He got up, and he just got back, and we went right back up on stage and we played the encore. So when something like that happens, it just makes the night like so bizarre and weird that you remember it,
Yeah.
Nice.
And when we sit together and we're having a couple of drinks and we're telling old stories. That one invariably comes up just because it's like, hey, remember that night? That was a crazy night, But, I could tell you stories of playing the heavy metal Holocaust in Stoke-on-Trent in England in 81. And Ozzy was on that bill and Motorhead, and that was a pretty memorable day. And there's a million stories I could tell. So that one sticks in my mind. But, of course, the US Festival, everybody asks about that one, so you end up telling the story over and over and over. And that one ends up taking on a kind of a legendary kind of thing. I don't know. I remember playing the Pasadena in Rose Bowl once. The Rose Bowl in Pasadena. We opened for Journey, and that would have been 83, I think.
Nice.
And that was amazing. And then we played I can't remember what they called it now. I think they called it the World Music Festival. It was a promoter in Texas, and you'd play the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, and then you'd play the Astrodome in Houston back to back, night after night.
Man.
Yeah, and Nugent was on that, and Sammy Hagar, and I got up on stage and I jammed with those guys on both those nights.
Nice.
So that was, frickin' crazy.
That's awesome. Well, Rick, you've got a really cool website and some socials and stuff. You want to tell the fans where the best place to keep up to date with you is?
Yeah, www.Rik-Emmett.com, and of course, you got to spell it a weird way, Rikemmett. And and of course, there's a Rick Emmett Instagram thing, there's a Rick Emmett Facebook thing, and whenever there's anything important that gets announced, it shows up on those social media things. And I've got a lady in Philadelphia area, Kathy Wagner, and she handles that stuff for me, and she does a great job. So
awesome.
Well, Rick, we want to tell everybody I can't wait till this documentary hopefully goes on sale so we can buy DVD copies of this, because it is outstanding.
Definitely.
It is outstanding. And we always let our guest pick the song out of the interview from the Triumph catalog. So which one do you want to pick?
Well, I've got a love relationship going on right now with Fight, so, it's long. I don't know if you want to play
We're fine with that.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, then, I would say Fight. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story about it, just so that, we can tee this up. It begins and ends with a bookend thing, where it's like a little classical kind of a melody. It goes da-da-da-da-da, doodle-da-da-da, doodle-da-da-da, doody-da-da. And we're in the studio, and Gil is sitting at the piano, and he's playing this little melody over these chord changes, and it's like a little sequence. Doodle-doom-doom-doom, doodle-doom-doom-doom, doodle-doom-doom-doom. So it's going down a tone every time. And so he's playing this little thing, and he keeps playing it over and over, and I'm going, what is that? And he's going, I don't know, it's just something I wrote. And so it's this da-da-lum-dum-dum, da-da-lum-dum-dum, da-da-lum-dum-dum. And I go, well, where does it go? And he goes, I don't know, that's all I've got. I said, well, okay, let's see if we can figure out a way to turn it around so that it comes back on itself.
Yeah.
So we had Gil's chunk that was doodle-doo-doo-doo, 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 and I went doodle-doo-dum, doodle-dum-dee-dum. And so I came up with the way to turn it around on itself and make it into something that we could use. And so we were working on this tune, Fight, which Gil had said, okay, I want a riff that goes, and he's on his snare drum, he goes, ka-ka-ka-ka-ka-ka, ka-ka-ka-ka-ka, ka-ka-ka-ka. So it's a rhythm that he wants. He wants chords that will play that rhythm. So we're standing there in the rehearsal, I'm coming up, I go, well, what about this? And I come up with this, ga-ga-ga-ga-ga-gum, ba-da-ga-ga-gum, gato. So it's in the key of D minor. And it just so happened that little riffy thing that he was playing, it started on a D minor. And I said, hey, we can use your thing like a bookend. It can be like the intro, and then when we get to the end of the tune, we'll do it like a full band. We'll play it like rocking out, but I'll play that melody on the guitar. And so that's how ideas happened in the studio in the Metalworks in 1981. Wow. And that's your story for Fight the Good Fight.
Outstanding. Well, wow. Rick Emmett, it has been an honor and a pleasure today to have you on Rock and Metal Revival, and you are welcome back here anytime.
Thanks, Jerry and Red. Thank you.